Welcome to the Awakening series, where we seek to infuse the movement with voices, resources, and inspiration for today's challenges. I'm your host, Jerry Davison, and today, again, I have the wonderful privilege of being here with Michael Guzman.
3 times in a row. Hey, Jerry, good to see you again. Good to be
Three in
here
a
with
row.
you.
Well, yeah, it's good to be with you. So let me remind people,
Yeah,
Michael, you are the media and resource pastor for Chog Northwest. You're also married to Kimberly, and the two of you own Riverview Kennels in Bandon, Oregon, which is a
yes.
dog and cat daycare boarding facility.
Yeah, I've
Sure,
been
that's some
knee deep.
exciting stuff.
Yeah, I've been knee deep in painting and remodeling our lobby lately. So yeah,
Wow,
lately I've got paint all over the hands for it. So
nice, nice, nice. And you also serve as, on the board of Warner Pacific University, so that's
yeah,
exciting stuff. Glad to have you
yeah,
on that charge. So we're gonna back up a little bit, because usually before we kind of
yep,
jump into content, we get to know the person we're talking with. And
yeah,
so, Michael, I want to ask you, first of all, when did you first surrender your life to Jesus?
yeah. It's kind of fun being on this side of it. Usually I'm the one
Yeah,
asking these biography
that's
questions, and
good.
I always frame it a little bit, I think maybe prejudice to mine, because mine, I don't have one day. It's like
Mm,
I've got um, really there's two significant moments. So, like, the earliest is junior high. I'm at Church of God Exeter. I've been going to the youth ministry. Pastor Lupe Morales is the youth pastor. And his question to me actually was, "Hey, do you want to get baptized?" I think there
mm,
must have been a baptism coming up, and he was looking to,
uh,
like, who else is interested. And I froze. And at least it feels like that. You know how, like, if you do a movie
mhm,
scene and, like, there's all these things going on. And in my head,
right.
because I'd been around the church long enough that I think I knew what he meant, but I filled in all the gaps. So I thought, I think he means, do I want to go to heaven? Well, I definitely don't want to go to hell.
Yeah, for
And I
sure.
think he means, like, do I like Jesus? Yeah, I like Jesus. I'm good with him. And so all of that's going through my head and thinking, like, go to heaven and like Jesus, that sounds good to me. So I say yes, I get baptized. And that moment, I mean, it really did make a difference in my life, a limited trajectory personally, but it made a huge difference in my family, because my
Mm,
family came to church to watch me get baptized, and it changed the whole entire infrastructure of my
wow.
family, because I didn't grow up in a Christian home.
Mhm.
And so now all of my family loves and serves Jesus, and we've got generations of people in Church of God, and but it started from that time frame, and so that
Right.
played a big role. I think the problem was is that I did not think that there was no repent and believe,
Mm,
because I didn't dialogue. There was no idea of discipleship, like how to grow into living a life that looks like Jesus. And so what happened is I just, we're all discipled by whatever we consume or watch or
right.
see or emulate. And so, as a kid of the 80s and 90s, I emulated everything that was there. So I was just discipled in the culture and thought,
Mhm.
well, I'm going to heaven anyway. So what difference does it make? And Jesus forgives, right? And so I had this real warped sense of what it meant. And so I was highly secular, in the way that I lived, but kind of claimed this salvation. But
Mhm.
again, there was no discipleship along the way. So fast forward to that, like, second mile marker for me, and I'm in college. I'm at a University of California Riverside, so it's a secular college. I'm not there pursuing. I had no idea ministry was on the radar for me at that
Mhm.
time.
Right.
Um, and in the midst of that environment, I was just confronted with rationality, secular thought, atheistic thought, a lot of ridicule toward Christianity. And so
Mhm.
in my mind at that time, it felt like either I needed to give up pursuing intelligence and rationality in order to hold on to my Christian faith, because it felt like
Mhm.
I needed to be dumb to be Christian,
Mm,
because everybody else around me was intelligent. That was the way that it was posed.
right.
And or I grab onto what's rational and logical, and I let go of Christianity. And somebody had given me a book by C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and I went, oh. And this may I don't mean any disrespect toward anybody who did influence me, but it felt like I had there was a smart Christian out there, and
Mm.
that opened up a whole new realm for me again because I
Yeah.
didn't have any influence, anybody pointing me in that direction. So I consumed everything that Lewis read and digested a lot, and in that season, then really came to not just find Jesus as Savior. I think that's a
Mhm.
little bit of what that first step was in my
Right.
limited childlike understanding. I then understood Him as Lord, and there was this moment, May 28, 1998, for me.
Mm.
And I just remember I was in a studio apartment all alone reading the book of Romans and had just come back from a Promise Keepers event. It was at the LA Coliseum. So I'd just been with tens of thousands of men worshiping Jesus and
Right,
had
right.
some cool moments happen with a friend of mine that I went with. And that night I was, I don't know, just in that room up late because I'm sure we traveled back late at night. So this is probably like honestly early morning and I'm reading through and through this kind of Bible study I'd been doing, I just instead of answering these real simple questions with or I'm sorry, answering these questions with simple answers,
Mhm.
I just I think it was probably some of the first times that I felt like the Holy Spirit like push me to something, and it was I wouldn't have had language for it then, but I think I would say now that the Lord was just saying, no, why don't you erase that yes and go deep. I
Mm.
want to know the full thing. And so now I'm like writing out these full answers. And I don't remember what they were. It was about your past and your faults and your failures. And now I'm just like, I'm pouring out my life. Pretty soon I'm just weeping.
Mm.
And the way that it came upon me is I just realized I've been embarrassed of you, Jesus.
Mm.
And you should have been embarrassed of me.
Mm.
And I just surrendered everything. I said, "You can do with me whatever you want. You can take me wherever you want, and I'll follow wherever you go." And so that day made all the difference. There were still all kinds of things to work out,
Sure.
socially, relationally, but it was honestly in short order after that point. And so, yeah, the way I frame it, salvation, this kind of infant version of it, and then really lordship and surrendering to Jesus and choosing to follow him at that point.
Yeah, that's amazing. Those are some bold commitments that you made on that date.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is kind of crazy
However
that I think,
however
yeah, the Lord takes that stuff really seriously. And I think that as I look back at like the account of scripture and you read the story of different people,
Mhm.
yeah, I think he takes that stuff real seriously. And so,
Yeah,
it's not that I've done it without fault in any way, but
sure.
I regularly go back to that.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you're in a secular institution preparing
Mhm.
for secular career.
Yeah, actually, I had an art degree at that, or I was
Art.
working toward an art degree.
Oh,
And I
gotcha.
realized I
Yeah.
did not want to be an artist because now I'm in the art world and I'm like, I don't want to sell myself because it's all
Mm.
about marketing yourself and your work. I don't want to
Right.
do that. I liked the inspirational side of it. I liked the
Mm.
creative side of it, but then that just leads to poverty. And so I'm like, what the
Right.
heck am I going to do? And so I decided I wanted to be a teacher. I had been taking some
Okay.
classes working with elementary ed kids, and I thought I'd really,
Uh,
and again, I think go back to that 1998 calling time. Um, I think I could change the world by influencing a generation.
mm.
And
Yeah,
that actually started to really creep into my mind and heart. So,
yeah, that's great. So when did you first recognize a call to ministry?
yeah. So you can hear in all of that,
Mhm.
nowhere is there a call to ministry.
Right.
But I think because of that surrender moment and then trying to like organize my life and my gift set around, I don't know what language I would have used then, but I think I've always been motivated by like, I want to be a person who brings change or even good.
Mm.
Um, if you define good and evil in your own terms, it can look
Right.
really
Yeah.
different. So you look at my past, I'm still trying to define it by what's good for me, but not necessarily what's good in the Lord's eyes. And so I think I what happened is I I applied at a Christian school in Riverside, Harvest Christian Fellowship. I'd been going to church there. It's Greg Laurie's church, and
Yep.
I'd been a part of it and had now been really infused in the word, raised up in the word, received that systematic theology that they walk in. But it was really helpful because I was like literally just walked through like a process. And that framework really did well for me. And they had a Christian school there, and I applied and I got hired on and um, worked there for 6 years. And during that time frame, I think I, I look back now and I realize I was already responding to a call to ministry that looked like elementary education.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't know it at that time. And I did it like anybody who does anything like a ministry. I did it with everything, and it was fun. Those are very fond and dear memories. I met Kimberly during that time frame. We got married, had our early married life there. Emily was born in that context of teaching there. But what's funny is I was grading papers, which is one of the things I hated to do as a
Yeah.
teacher. And I actually would design systems so that I had to grade as little as possible. I did the subjective stuff. Anything that was clearly objective, I farmed that out with a really cool, awesome group of volunteer
Nice.
parents. But um, I was grading and I was realizing I don't like grading papers. You know what I really like doing is I really like discipling these kids. I wonder what it would be like. And that's where the call to
Mm.
ministry, I think, in a more formal way came
Yeah.
about in my mind. I wonder what it would be like to be a pastor. And that turned into, talking with Pastor Greg Kindle at Church of God Exeter and taking my family back home and coming on to staff at Church of God at Exeter and beginning ministry there. So, as you can see, like I've stumbled into everything. It's not like I intentionally set out or had
Right.
anybody coach me in that direction. That's the other thing. The absence of coaches has been a pretty significant gap for me, but also
Mhm.
has really that gap has really informed me because I want to be that kind of person for other people, if at all possible. So yeah, kind of stumble into it and recognize that, and really, you know, again, fell in love with the idea of like being a change agent, influencing
Yeah.
people, helping people grow. Um, so yeah, there's more that could be unpacked there, but that's kind of how it unfolded.
Yeah. You mentioned the absence of coaching, but I'm sure that there were um, people in your life that help mentor you, help steer you, help disciple you. Who
Yeah.
were those folks?
Yeah, I'd actually say no, there really weren't intentional
Interesting.
people. Yeah.
Got it.
I think there were people accidentally or that did influence, like, so it's not that there were
Um,
no influences. I don't mean
sure,
that,
sure.
but like mentor, coach,
Mhm.
disciple, nothing formal like
Got
that,
it.
or even close to formal, nothing relational like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
My Aunt Trisha at early ages like had a profound impact in turning me toward the church.
Mhm.
Very just simple relational love. But I think probably anything that got close to um, more intentional wasn't until I was working there at Harvest Christian Fellowship. And
Got it.
the at the time the vice principal of the school, Del Campbell, just, I don't know, in some ways took me under his wing. And
Mhm.
I learned a lot about how he worshiped, how he walked out, his own life in fear and trembling and served the Lord with his gifts. And yeah, he
Got it.
played a really big part. And there was a lot of time invested in simple ways. Like, in fact, so he was there, I came to him and said, "Hey, I'm looking at asking this young lady to marry me." And
Mm.
I got, he was like a spiritual father in a lot of
Uh,
ways, and spoke into that. And then I had this idea that I wanted to make my marriage bed as like my wedding gift to my wife. And I had a little bit of woodworking skills, and I was talking it
uh,
over with him, and he's like, "We could do it. Let's do it." And so we made this bed, this beautiful
that's
bed
amazing.
that is, is our marriage bed. And he helped in that. We spent a lot of time that way. So Dale Campbell really played a big part, and it really wasn't until I came into contact with 3DM then that it
Mhm.
became all the more intentional. I think I was trying to still do that stuff without anybody really helping shape me or show me.
Yeah.
And once my friend Rusty Graves, who played a real close friendship
Mhm.
relationship of discipleship, deeply influenced me. We went to a three-dimensional ministries conference, and I got connected with guys like Bob Ronglian, who's been on this,
Yep.
awakening series because of that role that he's played in my life. Um, and through very intentional and practical investment really helped me to learn how to be a coach and a discipler of other people. So I think those two voices, Dale Campbell and Bob Rongley, and singularly have been the most important ones along the way.
Yeah. It isn't it amazing? I mean, maybe not amazing, but I talked to a lot of pastors who that's the story, right? No,
Yeah, I
no
know.
real mentor, no real
Yep.
coaching, no none of that. And I know as you and I have talked, our desires to
Yeah.
change that, right?
Yeah.
Because my story's similar, other than my senior pastor who really took me under his wings, didn't really have any formal discipleship,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
I hear you.
Well, thanks, Michael, for sharing
Yeah.
a little bit more about yourself.
Glad to do
That's
so.
that's great. Great to get to know you a little better on
Yep.
this side of the microphone, right?
Yep. I hear you.
Yeah, so that's great. So our last couple of conversations,
Yep.
our first conversation this season was to roll out the new name, Chog
Yeah.
Northwest, Church of God
Yeah.
Northwest.
Church of God Northwest.
So excited! I've started to put that on some of my, like my emails
Yeah.
down in the signature line. Chog Northwest.
Nice.
We're going to be rolling out some of that information
Yeah.
on, in our connection. So we talked about that. Then we kind of talked about out of that comes kind of a vision, right?
Yep. Yep.
And you shared with us some amazing information about kind of how our American history paralleled the church
Yeah.
history and kind
Yeah.
of walked us through that.
Yep.
Talked a little bit
Yeah.
about pioneers and developers
Yep.
and how we need to have both those folks play together. So
Yeah, yeah. So
amazing.
we
So
landed on the language of pioneering and
we did. Yep.
developing a Jesus-shaped landscape in the Northwest.
Jesus shaped, yeah,
Yeah,
which is key, right?
yep, absolutely.
You know, talking about the gospel as kingdom, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah,
makes a huge difference in how we approach things. So today we're going to invite you to walk us through kind of some values that
yep,
we've landed on as well. So we've got the new name, the vision, and now we're going to talk about some
yeah,
values. So
yeah.
why don't you walk us through that
Yeah,
process?
you got it. Yeah. So
Appreciate it.
I see values and vision and values as like the key architecture inside of an organization. So I've helped to craft this like at Church of God Exeter while we went through a transitionary change into this. And so we had specific vision and values that then things were built out of. I did this for Church of God Central California. We built out vision and values and then tried to live out of those things. And then now here we are. I've done this, I guess, in secular organizations like as a marketing director
Mhm.
helping, it's still helpful to have some sense of vision and values that help us to orient around what we'll do and also what we'll say no to. I think that
Right.
that's some of the help that a clear set of vision and values is about. And so, yeah, that whole idea of walking us through the history to help us understand, cast vision for change from our roots. It does feel like it makes sense that, pioneering and developing has always been a part of the Northwest landscape and the Northwest territory, our history, and then you look at it in a biblical sense, like we need pioneers, those that go first, and then we need developers, those that come along. I mean, even think about Paul and Barnabas. They
Yeah.
go out and pioneering ministry, and they keep going. But then you see Paul develop people along the way, and then he'll send somebody out to Timothy, for instance. He'll send somebody out in much longer time to stay there and to develop what they had first pioneered together. So you can see that all over throughout the
Yeah.
scriptures. So yeah, these values then, were I think I've got some of this in the slideshow, but I'll front load it with this, where the values are, or the vision is about, this kingdom orientation and how will we live out the kingdom, and the gospel of the kingdom. Values are really about what kind of relational covenantal ties will hold us together while we're pursuing all of that. So here we go. So I'll start off with this. This is John 14:6, super familiar passage. Um, and, Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. I think this goes back to, if you pull my history into this, I can see this stuff lived out all the more. So you isolate those three key words that I'm sure most of us have preached a message on: way, truth, and life. What I found is that I, um, even early on, understood that the truth of Jesus was really important. The word of Jesus, understanding right from wrong. We've talked some of those things. Even as I got to Harvest Christian Fellowship, there was this infusion of understanding the truth and living that out.
Mm.
And so there was a strong emphasis on it. The life of Jesus, I think the way that I understood it was, the life of Jesus was perfect, righteous, holy, and good. But at the same time frame, I think I inherited this idea that it was unattainable. And
Mm.
so I think when I look at, like, the way that I put together my Christology, yes, Jesus was divine, and yes, Jesus was human, but the human part was just so that he could come here and tell the story, and ultimately so that he could just
Mm.
truly be divine. And so I think, well, I'm not divine, and so
Right.
it largely seemed unattainable. And then the way, I don't know that I ever had anybody really emphasize living in the way of
Mm.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I knew that the early church was called the way, but I didn't have any influence where there were emphases that way. So the truth was important, the life was unattainable, and the way just really wasn't mentioned very much.
Yeah.
What I've discovered, though, now kind of being coached and mentored and discipled, is that when you actually learn to live into the way of Jesus, I mean, that's what I walked us through in the gospel of the kingdom segment. Like, how did Jesus communicate the gospel? What
Right.
gospel was he proclaiming? That's a way of looking back at the way of Jesus. He's like the key hermeneutic that we look through texts at. So looking at the way of Jesus, patterning my life after him, and embracing that truth, still holding on to it, that you actually can step into the life of Jesus. Because again, I think, like I mentioned, my Christology being formed like in bits and pieces, like there's a huge part of like the work that the Holy Spirit does in the life of Jesus as he walks as a human who set aside his divine privileges,
Right.
um, that I think I just missed. And so if I look at that now, what I'm noticing is Jesus showed us the way to live as humans. And that's made a radical difference. So the things that Jesus did are things that are actually meant to be things that we're to step into and do and be, as a community and as individuals. So the way plus the truth equals the life. Do you want to, any thoughts there before I get to the next segment, Jerry?
That's no, it's really good because a quote from Dallas Willard comes to mind. He
Yeah.
said, "Would live our life." Uh,
Yep.
I'm gonna blow the quote, but basically,
Yeah.
live our life as if Jesus was living our life through us.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
really, so not to be perfect, not to be divine, but really to live in the way Jesus would live our life as we
Yep.
are. So, yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely.
really
Yep.
helpful.
Yeah. And I think that informs you. I said this in a way about my calling as a
Mhm.
teacher. I think in some ways in ministry circles, rightly so, but maybe wrongly so, there are consequences, I guess, to it. Rightly so, we emphasize, like with, people who are ordained or called into ministry, we emphasize that call and make it distinct from the call that anybody else has. And I
Mm.
honestly think that
Right.
if we look to, just like that Willard quote that we're both butchering, that
Right.
if we really were to surrender our lives and live it like Jesus were to live it, as a
Yeah.
doctor, as a nurse, as a kennel owner,
Absolutely.
then all of us have a calling to step into, and he wants to infiltrate every one of those places, not just the church.
The
And
church
so
members.
I think sometimes we elevate that call, rightly so, again, but with consequences to attached to it.
Right. Yeah. No.
All right, so I want to move from there and take a look at, like, well, if Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and if we embrace the way of Jesus, like, what's a good how can we get a handle on what his life looks like so that we can begin to pattern our lives after him? And so this is Luke chapter 6. It's a
Mhm.
really interesting picture of Jesus' ministry, because what I notice here in this is, like, it's a pattern that you see play out through every one of the gospels. Jesus kind of does it here in this concentrated fashion. So this is uh, this is Luke 6. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. And when morning came, he called his disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, whom he also designated apostles. He went down with him and stood up, the little three dots right there. He goes through and the text explicitly names all of them.
All of them.
I'm bypassing that just for brevity's sake. So now he's got this crew that he's isolated and pulled and called to him, and he went down with them, and he stood on a level place. A large crowd of his disciples was there, and a great number of people from all over Judea, from Jerusalem, and from the coastal region around Tyre and Sidon, who had come to hear him and to be healed of their diseases. Those troubled by impure spirits were cured, and the people all tried to touch him because power was coming from him and healing them all. So it's just real interesting that, in that brief summary of really some important moments in Jesus' life and ministry, you see these three different elements that I've highlighted. He
Mhm.
goes up
Mhm.
on a mountain, and you can see, like, in that, and reading in between the lines, you can see, like, this close, vibrant relationship that he's got with the Father. Like, he really is dependent. John talks about how, like, Jesus is quoted as saying, I only do what I see
Yeah.
the Father doing. I only speak things that I hear the Father speaking. That that wasn't some I want to say esoteric, but that wasn't some magical thing that
Mhm.
happened where, he then just walked robotically through it. Like, he
Right.
was fully dependent upon connecting with the Father with the same limitations that we show up to the table.
Right.
And so he spends all night in prayer, and he lets the Father direct him and guide him. And so I think, there's an essence of that. So he had this beautiful relationship upward with God, but he then calls these disciples. So there's what's interesting is the text, talks about plural disciples, and it's definitely
Mhm.
more than 12. But
Uh,
he distinctly calls 12 of them to come really, really close to this inward relationship with them, where he does spend very intentional times, showing them what he's doing, teaching them what he's doing, training them, giving them the chance to go and do it, and then,
mhm.
reviewing it all with them. He's a coach in all that sense, and he's raising them up for that time where he'll say, "Hey guys, I'm heading out of here. See you later. Go do all those things that I taught you to do, and teach others to obey them." So he has this great
Yeah.
inward relationship, and he gave access to his life to the disciples. Again, I think because of the way Jesus did this is the way that it largely informs, like, well, who mentored me? Well, nobody like Jesus did.
Mhm.
But these
Right.
two, when I mentioned Dell and Bob, they both did it much more in the way of Jesus,
Mhm.
and it made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And then you see what he does is he pivots with those 12. There's other disciples around, but he pivots with those 12, and he comes to the crowds, people who maybe aren't yet in a relationship with the Father, and their need is the primary thing that is kind of like in the front of them,
Mhm.
whether it's healing or whether they're tormented by, in this case, impure spirits. And he does ministry. So Jesus pivots and he does this outward ministry toward the world, with his disciples watching, which is class, 101 for them. Hey guys, this is what we do. This is how we live out the gospel of the kingdom. And so that picture has been really, really helpful for me to see that Jesus
Mhm.
had this up relationship with the Father, in relationship with the disciples, and then out relationship with the world, and that this would be a Jesus shaped life. And so when we talk about pioneering and developing a Jesus shaped landscape in the
Mhm.
Northwest, we
Right.
really are pulling on this kind of language in it to say we think it should include up, in, and out, because
Absolutely.
it's easy to get out of balance there. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just, you know, thought, okay, well, if we're going to pioneer a Jesus-shaped landscape, it requires Jesus-shaped people.
Yeah.
So
Whew. Yeah.
really, it's
Yeah, and I think sometimes we've pulled really good concepts and principles from the secular world, from the business world,
right.
um, and those concepts and principles, they work. That's why they're working and generating maybe revenue or growth in the secular
Hmm.
culture. And when we take them on without being Jesus shaped people, we
Right.
might get results that, with metrics, that people tend to count. But yeah, if you don't do it in truly the way of Jesus as a Jesus shaped individual, it can go south. I think that's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why, it's not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why we have such a propensity to see on the news,
Mm. Right.
scandal and stuff like
Right.
that going on the inside. I think it's because we've got to let Jesus shape that stuff from the beginning.
Right. Good stuff.
Yeah. Well, this just kind of the transition slide before moving from here into some of those things that you're actually talking about. What I notice about this particular discipleship tool that I would just simply call the triangle is
Hmm.
that it's a really good picture of the life of Jesus, because we could read through all the gospels and see and categorize, where does Jesus do up? Where
Right.
does Jesus do in and out? And I mean, that's a robust study of the Gospels. You could survey the Gospels through that. So it's a really good picture of the
Mhm.
life of Jesus. And I think it's simple enough on one hand, that it carries a lot of strength because of its simplicity, that it holds up. Like there's you're not missing anything. It really does give you a real simple version of the life of Jesus, but it also operates really well as a mirror. Like I can evaluate my own life. This has been helpful for me in this
Right.
transition from California to, Oregon, where I had different context in my life for up, in, and out in
Hmm.
Central California that are different here, as we came without any relationships already in play. We came as a family unit in a lot of ways, like Abraham, leaving behind and coming to a new place. Our in, though we had it as like uh, an immediate and small extended family, because we moved here with 4 generations of family,
Hmm. Right.
we didn't have other context. And so our in has been very weak, and it still is the weaker portion. We're developing that, but it's growing at the rate that relationships grow. It takes time. You can't
Right.
fast forward those.
Right.
Our up has been the huge, like, um, anchor through it all. We've got practices in up that help us, and so I can see that up has been a huge strength for me,
Mhm.
for us as a family. And then out, it's just really flipped it. Whereas before I had to work really hard to be around people who weren't in a relationship with Jesus. Now, like, the primary number of people that we come into contact with actually aren't in a relationship with
Mm.
Jesus. And so it's really interesting that our out and our in, or our out and our up, are so, high, if you will, on a scale of 1 to 10. They're higher numbers, where our
Right.
in is
Right.
the weaker one and requires more development. So notice it's just a good mirror for me to
Yeah.
evaluate my life and go,
Right.
how do I grow into this? And I mean, that infuses my prayer. That infuses how we try to spend our time and invest our time. We're like trying to intentionally look for who are the people that God has placed in us, in our world, so that we can intentionally grow those
Hmm.
relationships and
Yeah.
friendships in the kingdom.
It's really good.
Yep. And then it's a window too. because and that's really how we're using this as a value set for the association.
Hmm. Right.
We're saying we want to look out at the horizon of the Northwest, the cities that we're planted in, the places where we may be able to have influence, and we want to then notice, well, where can we bring up or in or out. That might be inside of our association as we look at it through
Right.
the lenses of that as a window, or into the wider world. How do we influence this for the sake of the kingdom? And so that picture of mirror window is one way that I really try to vet tools that I
Hmm.
use. If it can hold up to all three of those, it's usually a pretty strong tool then.
Yeah. Good. Good.
All right. So this is the vision we already talked about, pioneering and developing a Jesus shaped landscape in Oregon and Washington. I do interchange that, by the way, here on this slide. I've got Oregon and Washington because there are two states that are specifically
Hmm.
named in kind of our boundaries, but I'll
Right.
also just say in the Northwest as well.
Yeah.
And then here's the values. I'm going to walk through these three that are really triangulated up in and out values. And so the first one is presence of Jesus is our North Star. Now, is our North Star right now, you could say, is it's like we're processing that language at the moment.
Right.
We know that presence of Jesus is the language we want, but like there's questions from the district council from that we think it has great merit. Like, is our North Star is that does it strip away Jesus um, as Lord? Does it strip away and secularize it too much? And so we're toying with that. But presence of Jesus is absolutely what we're going after. Again, if you look at in the up direction, it's all about
Mhm.
presence. If you think about presence, like in the garden, I was just watching a Bible Project video. That's the reading plan that I use. It has Bible Project videos infused throughout it. We're working through the book of Exodus right now, and they were talking about the presence of God in the garden and
Yeah.
pre-fall. I mean, think about the access that Adam and Eve had to the presence of God, this closeness, this intimacy that informed and shaped their, being image bearers, their being representatives, as he, called them with a commission there. And then you can see it changes, of course, on the other side of the fall, but you see the presence of God there in the garden. Think about it in the wilderness.
Mhm.
So, again,
Yeah.
Exodus is what I've been reading. And so right at that point where they've now left Egypt and they're having those first encounters at the
Mhm.
mountain with God. And so
Mhm.
there's fear and trembling. Don't come across this line. Moses comes up. Um, uh, oh my goodness, Joshua comes up, couldn't pull
Right.
his
Right.
name to memory, and leaders do. But you're beginning to see that this presence that of God that they come into contact with at the mountain ultimately finds itself in the tabernacle.
Mm.
And all of
Right.
these
Right.
rules around the priests and the tabernacle are about stewarding this presence, being presence people and being guided by the presence. And then
Mhm.
we know that there's a pillar of fire and a pillar of cloud that is the presence of God guiding them. And so
Right.
again, you can see that language is what we're trying to pull on by saying North Star, because in a world where you know seafaring was the
Mhm.
norm and we didn't
Right.
have a Google map to turn to, you had
Right.
to orient yourself in a world that where the water is and the waves are moving all over. And so a North Star is truly what Jesus is in the world.
Exactly.
He's the one that we orient life around and is true north. That's other language we've talked about. The
Yeah.
presence of Jesus is true north.
Yeah.
And then think about at the baptism of Jesus, just
Mhm.
to fast forward into the New Testament, you've got Jesus coming, baptized by John the Baptist, and then you've got, the heavens open and a voice from heaven declaring, "This is my son whom I love, with whom I'm well pleased." And then the presence of the Spirit of God comes and rests
Mm.
and remains on him through
Yeah.
that whole time frame. And the same is true of us, that we are people of the presence. The Spirit of God has come to live and to dwell in us. And so we've got to steward that. We've got to orient ourselves
Right.
around that and actually practice those things. So that's presence. And then Pentecost, that kind of
Mhm.
already have mentioned that what happens there at the baptism of Jesus, is that then eventually fast forward, he said that, he would baptize with fire, and you see this,
Yeah.
tongues of fire on the people of God, empowering them to go from the kind of bumbling idiots that they were before to world changing folks. And it's not that they're
Yeah.
perfect, but
Right.
they're empowered by the presence of God. So presence of Jesus is our North Star, or is true north. We're kind of playing around with that. And then the values, the second one, practices of
Mhm.
Jesus
Yeah.
in community form us. This is important. This is really about pushing us into like being people of the way. And so we want to press into like doing communal practices
Right.
as as an association, as a district. When you say it like that, maybe it sounds really weird, but think about the communal practices of early Church of God. The gospel trumpet was a part
Right.
of that.
Right.
Flying bands were a part of that. Mission homes were a part of it. Camp meetings. So like we're always practice people, but what practices will
Right.
we use to be able to shape us? And so think about, in the early books of the Bible, the seventh day, in Genesis, that God sets a pattern in place for people to consider the seventh day holy as on the day that he rests. It's about a practice
Mhm.
and taking time to be with the creator versus doing what he's called us and created us to do.
Yeah.
Look at Passover again. That's where I'm reading right now. They just finished like detailed instructions about what to do the first time as they leave Egypt, but it sets this annual practice in motion so that they're to do this thing over and over. It's that Passover that Jesus takes and morphs into communion, which is a practice that we
Mhm. Right.
embrace. And I know that it's a sacrament. That's another level of language attached to it to make it distinct, but still, it's a practice.
Yeah.
The temple and the tabernacle, like I was talking about the presence of God, there's all these practices about how they should approach certain types of, all these various types of sacrifices that are made, ways to be able to come in, times where you don't go in. All of
Mhm.
these
Mhm.
practices shape those things. Jesus Day Synagogue, like we read in the previous episode about how Jesus, reads the scroll of Isaiah and says,
Right.
today, in your hearing, this is fulfilled. Like the synagogue practices that Jesus would have been in. They met on certain days of the week. Somebody reading the scroll and coming from out of the community to read that. All of those would have been practices that would have been engaged with, and so we want to
That's so
engage
good.
in those practices of Jesus because again, what practices we choose to focus on are the ones that form us. And then the last one, proclamation. So presence, practices, and proclamation. And again, you'll kind of hear parts of that vision talk in the gospel of the kingdom, but
Mhm.
proclamation of Jesus, of the gospel of the kingdom in word and deed.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that that gospel of the kingdom is, that bigger gospel is both in word and deed. So that's an out component. Think
Mhm.
about again in the garden, God makes Adam and Eve as image bearers. That's covenantal relationship, but they have a responsibility to represent Him. That's both in word and deed. That is meant to be, a part of our identity and who we are. Abraham is called not to just leave his country, but there's covenant that's formed with Abraham, and then he's told that he will be a blessing
Yeah.
to the nations around him, and that covenant relationship with God will end up calling him to be a blessing to the world. That deeply informs what Jesus does and how he does it and who we are as a people. The gospel of the kingdom,
Yeah.
this idea that Jesus came proclaiming that the time has come, the kingdom of God is near, to repent and believe, and
Yeah.
proclaiming this gospel, but then also demonstrating it. Even in that Luke 6 passage, you can see him healing, casting out demons. There's
Mhm.
both this proclamation of it, come near, the king is near, the king is good, and he wants to be closer to you. But there's also this demonstration of it too, with healing,
Yeah.
deliverance, and liberation, which is largely informed by that Luke 6 or Luke 4 passage, where Jesus is reading and quoting from Isaiah. The
Yeah.
ministry of the gospel is meant to actually lead to some change. And I think the world around us is longing for a witness like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's
So
good. It's really good.
those are, let me go back to this one right here. Those are those three values: presence of Jesus, practices of Jesus, and proclamation of Jesus.
Yeah, and in that language again, you can see where the triangle comes in, right? The up, in, and out,
Yeah.
and I think as I was thinking about the practice of Jesus in community, I think that's
Hmm.
we can't ignore that.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's so important to be doing this stuff together and proclaiming, demonstrating the
Yeah,
gospel of the kingdom. It's
yeah,
here.
yep, I hear
I
you.
live into it.
Yeah, yeah. Even to just echo what you're saying about the in community side, excuse me. I mean, all of us are doing practices
Right.
at an individual level, even at a church level. But I think there's a lot of conversation that still needs to be had out of this. But if we're going to embrace this practices of Jesus as pastors and leaders in the association, leading churches and communities there, what will we say yes to doing
Right.
together, that will then help shape all of that? You know, it ends up being a big blank canvas, and we've got to figure out together, what will we say yes to. Maybe we'll cast vision for that, out of the
Mhm.
root of, like, what's the gospel trumpet for us, and
Yeah.
what's camp meeting of today.
Yeah.
How do we do those things? They could inform, but I think it is largely going to end up shaping, what do we say yes to, and then what what not only has the Church of God done, but what has the church throughout history done that we can embrace and put into practice there.
Right. I love that image of the window, right? I
Yep.
mean, this is a window we can look through, and I think too, we can't ignore the presence, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
we because I think a lot of times we assume the presence,
Yes,
right?
we do.
But
Yeah,
God is a gentleman,
yeah,
gentle person,
yeah, I hear you.
and longs for us to invite him in
Yeah,
to our lives, to our gatherings. I think
yeah,
so often, we we go maybe to a worship service or somewhere else, assuming the presence,
yeah,
and you know we can just go through the motions without the presence. But without
yeah,
that north star, without that,
yeah,
we're just spinning our wheels. So
yeah, I hear you.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I like the way that you put it. We assume the presence, and I
Mhm.
think we,
Right.
in a sense, rightfully do, because we
Sure.
understand our theology. He is
Right.
omniscient.
All
He is
around. Yep.
omnipresent. I get that.
Yep.
But recognizing his presence, being people who pursue it, orient our lives around it, wait
Right.
on the presence, that's different
Right.
than just assuming that we've already got the God stamp of approval and
Yep.
then moving forward thinking that he's going to bless it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
And
makes me
really,
think.
yeah.
And say, it
Go
makes
ahead.
me think of just this practical thing right now with, kind of my parenting and my two girls. Emily's 19 and Hannah's 17. So we are going through this transition where they're living at home. Hannah's going to be graduating from high school in just a matter of months. Emily's,
Wow.
in that college realm, and she's working here at the kennel. But with Emily in particular, I've been having conversations like, hey, honey, I think that you should take me out to coffee every week or every month or whatever you choose. That's a
Mhm.
practice thing.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
you should think about questions to ask me. And I think I'm trying to do is help to negotiate how to mature our relationship in there,
Yeah.
so that it goes beyond dad, who tells things or
Right.
says things because it's my responsibility, to, um like, hey, you have me here. And because it's funny, this came out of, like, she has a good friend. She's like, dad, this person needs to spend some time with you because you're so good at this. And I
Yeah.
said, honey, I think you need to, like, make sure that
Yeah.
you get what you can out of this relationship as well. And so I can go to coffee with you, but if you're not prepared to get out of me what you
Right.
currently need for the moment, then we just had coffee. And that's good. I'll
Right.
always show up for coffee.
Sure.
But do you want
Good call.
me to show up beyond that? And do you want my life to show up at the point where your life needs impact?
Yeah.
To me, it's the same but different. Like
Right.
we need to show up and as people who are truly pursuing the presence, and like I won't go unless your presence go with me. Think
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
Moses, like that,
Yeah.
that type of stuff.
Right. And I think, we talk about disciplines, or,
Yep.
we'll talk later about rule of life, but
Yeah. Yeah.
all of those things are opening up space
Yep.
for
Absolutely.
his presence to come in. Yeah,
Yep.
we gotta really think through that. So
Yeah.
it's good.
All right. I think just one more segment. You
All
hinted
right.
on this. Like we've got to be
Do it.
leaders who are kind of living into this up in and out lifestyle, this Jesus shaped life. And so this is stuff that we develop that like part of what we want to do then is develop the kind of leader who can pioneer and develop a
Mhm.
Jesus shaped landscape. And that, on one hand, you could read that sentence and go, well, who are you, Jerry? And who are you, Michael, to say that you're going to
Right.
develop people? Well, I mean, we have had a lot of influence in coaching and
Yeah.
mentoring in our own lives, and we can only give away what we've received. And so
Right.
we're in process, and we recognize that the people in the association, some of them are going to be beyond us in some ways.
Mhm.
Awesome. Praise the Lord for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But I think any way that we can, we want to push toward that idea of picture mirror window with the triangle. We want to embrace this idea of further developing and partnering with one another. It's not showing up because we're better at this than others,
Right.
but we want to be people who lovingly, hold accountable to this bigger vision. And so you can see it kind of with the three circles here and the way that they overlap. What we want to do is we want to, this is where practices, presence comes into play. We want to help people be deep abiders,
Yeah.
abiding in the Lord. John 15 language here, abiding in the presence of God, so that we get our orders from there. We really want to be shaped by that, and we want to see our leaders known as. I mean, can you imagine, Jerry, a future where like people just are like, man, those Church of God pastors and leaders, they just are soaked in the presence of God. They just know how to rest in Him and work
Yeah.
from that presence.
Yeah.
All the things they do just seem to, this is like Joseph language. Everything he puts
Yeah.
his hand to, he just keeps rising up and doing more. I think that's got to be in that secret place and abiding.
Yeah.
In the in dimension, like we've got to be equippers. We
Mhm.
can't just be people who are receiving from the Lord, like in the in dimension. We've got a responsibility. This is like Ephesians 4 equipper language here. We've got to raise up to maturity the whole body in all of the different ways that it's shaped and the gifts that God has given to the body, who are people. We need to help shape those people, and we need pastors and leaders in the association to know how to do this. So this goes back to that mentor question. Sure, we want to have a space where mentors can play without it being authoritative in a
Mhm.
weird way.
Right. Right.
But we also want everybody to rise up into that, grow into maturity and be the mentor equiper that you're called to be with the people in your context. And then in the out dimension, we want to embrace the identity of and calling of missionaries.
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like for you, Jerry. You can comment if it's different, but I remember somebody early on in my Christian walk saying, there's going to be a time in the future where missionaries are going to come from
Mm.
out of the United States into the United States. And I thought,
Right.
oh, that's so far off in the distance. And in a lot of ways, that has happened around us in short order. There
Yep.
are missionaries that
Yep.
do come to the United States, and the United States, especially the Northwest that we live in, largely
Yep.
is a secular culture. The Christian roots or influence is largely fading away. And so that means we can't assume those things
Right.
or try to leverage position and power to get those back into place so that we can have kind of a Christian culture. We need to do the work of missionaries, and we need to reach that culture right where it is. And when you go into a foreign context, you go in differently
Yep.
than when you go in as a native. And so there's a lot of shift there where we need to be missional, learn to be missionaries to
Yep.
the cities that we're actually planted in right now. So
Yeah.
this is what we think, stepping into this, how we want to be able to shape leaders in the association, and not just the ones that are in those called positions.
Yeah,
Every leader that has influence over other leaders. We want to see a culture of abiders, equippers, and missionaries.
yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
Big dream.
So, yeah. And then I just overlaid,
Nice.
those three again just to say it. So I think that's it. That's what I got, Jerry.
That's really good. Appreciate it, Michael. Appreciate you walking us through this today, and good, exciting things coming, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, building on what was before, right? We're not,
Yeah.
we're not saying, oh, the past was
Yeah.
bad. We're good.
Yep. Yeah. I hear you.
We're building.
Yeah. And I think we're trying to show, I mean, that's what this series of videos is about. Like,
Yep.
show what's going on back behind it. And we're, again, hoping to invite a conversation. This has gone through the staff team and the district council through prayer and consideration and conversation. So it's already coming out of the other side.
Right.
We're not saying, hey, come and just tell us what your favorite words are. We're
Right.
inviting you into that conversation, even with that part about like North Star versus True North versus something else. We know conceptually what we want there. We just don't know the right language quite yet that we're going to land on. And so that's a part of the invitation to this. So,
Yep. Well, thanks again, Michael. And thanks everybody
Yep.
for watching this episode.
Yep. Take care, everybody. Bless you guys.
Okay.